The following video is dedicated to the memory of Phil Hartman. No, Blasto is not on the list, but being that 1998 PS1 game was one of the last things that great man ever took part in, it's only right.
Damn, got you all over my shoe.
In the mid-90s, a new combatant entered the gaming arena to challenge the established champions of prior generations, the Sony PlayStation. With its innovative and quality library of games and features, the system quickly shot to the top of the video game market and became the must-have system of the decade. As the years progressed, the system only became more and more of a powerhouse in terms of the number of incredible gaming experiences being delivered. By 1998, well, it looked like nothing could stop it. In previous installments of this series, we looked at the best PS1 games of 95, 96, and 97. Now, it's time to look at the system's 7 best North American releases of 1998, a year that was not only incredible for the system, but is often considered to be one of the best ever years for gaming, period. You're watching The Legend of Games.
Seven.
Starting things off at number 7 is Einhander. Do you like shooters? More specifically, the side-viewed flying vehicle type? Well, this is quite possibly the coolest one on the PlayStation. Einhander has you piloting the, Einhander, a ship that uses an arm to swap the positioning of your secondary weapon, whether that be a Gatling gun, homing missiles, a giant lightsaber. There are a lot of weapons in this game. As was the case for a lot of Squaresoft's PS1 library, this game has an awesome soundtrack that you might just want to listen to on its own. There are multiple versions of the titular ship to choose from to match your preferred playstyle. Do you want to fire 2 of your default machine guns at once in exchange for having only 1 slot for a special weapon? Would you rather that be 2 possibly losable secondary weapons? You're likely to find a version of the ship that best suits your style of kicking ass. Again, this game is incredibly cool. Despite its age, the neon-filled introductory level is still a sight to see. This game's visuals are proof that, when done right, the PS1's graphics can indeed hold up. The bosses especially look great. But I'm warning you now, this game is extremely difficult. For one thing, you die on 1 hit and have to return to the last checkpoint. Even on the easiest setting, you're not likely to beat this game on your first playthrough. A lot of the sections after the first require familiarization in order to master, and on top of that, there are limited continues. That said, the difficulty is not quite at a level where it feels impossible. Coming back on a second run, you'll likely find yourself performing a lot better and getting a lot further. And you'll probably want to keep playing to see the next amazing set piece this game has to offer. And hey, if that still sounds like too much effort, you could always give the Japanese version of the game a try, which has free mode, which lets you play the game with unlimited continues, with the trade-off being that there's no score. I mean, did you really care about the score when it was there? Or, you could always play it emulated with save states. It's okay, I won't tell. If you're looking for a challenge-filled shooter with an impressive presentation, this is absolutely worth giving a try. Really, as far as 32-bit shooters go, you can't get much better than this.
6.
Up next is Klonoa, Door to Phantomile. This is a 2.5D platformer that puts you in the role of Klonoa, a cat-like creature that can use its ears to briefly hover or grab and throw objects and enemies. Use these abilities to get through 12 challenge-filled levels set in the dream world of Phantomile, as Klonoa and his friend Hupo go on a journey to prevent an evil spirit from turning it into a world of nightmares. Now, there were a decent amount of 2.5D platformers in the 32-bit era, such as Pandemonium, Clockwork Knight, and Tomba, which was also a 98 PlayStation release. But Klonoa may very well be the best of all of these. The levels are incredibly well designed. You aren't just running left or right and jumping over things. You need to use your abilities wisely to get around obstacles and reach new areas. The same goes for the game's bosses, which are some of the best on the system, often being multi-tiered and requiring strategy and skill to defeat. And even if you do make it through the levels, there are optional collectibles that require you to fully grasp the game's mechanics in order to reach. A sign of a great game. The presentation of the levels is excellent as well. You often see an area in the distance that you later end up in. This, of course, seems obvious in a fully 3D game, but in something like this, it definitely takes more thought on the developer's part. There are also little details in the environment, like these little red guys going down a slide and jumping into the water, that really make the world feel alive and well thought out. And then there's the presentation of the story. This game really feels special. Everything is told via text as the characters speak in their own unique language. Really, it feels almost like an RPG. And that is a good thing, because it ends up being just as epic and emotional as a lot of RPGs from the era. As with the previously mentioned Clockwork Knight, which I covered in my video on the Sega Saturn's launch lineup, Klonoa feels very much like an 80s anime film in its overall tone, along the lines of something like the Unico movies. Despite its cuteness, things do get fairly dark. I mean, look at the villain. He's not some derpy mad scientist. He's actually evil. And you better believe it, when you do finally face him, things get pretty intense. Now, the game does have some issues. Among other things, there's seemingly no indication that you've come across a checkpoint. When you die, you find out where the last one was. They're also fairly infrequent. And although it never feels cheap, the throwing can often require a bit more precision than I would say is necessary. However, these things hardly affect the experience as a whole. Klonoa is a game that is well worth playing, and is a great example of expanding on the 2D platforming gameplay of the 8 and 16-bit generations to fully bring it into the 32-bit era, while still remaining a 2D platformer at heart.
Five.
And now we get to what may just be the most epic game on the PlayStation, Xenogears. This Squaresoft RPG starts in the somewhat typical fashion of the genre, with the main character, FaZe, village being destroyed in a fiery inferno, but then goes far, far beyond that, with a story spanning thousands of years, featuring deep philosophical and religious themes that simply weren't seen in Western-released console games at the time. That may sound like a lot to take in, and it is, but even when viewed at just face value, this is a very cool game. For one thing, you get awesome 90s anime cutscenes. In fact, this may have been the most anime game ever seen by Western audiences in '98. Interestingly, This is a rare turn-based RPG that incorporates quite a lot of platforming elements, with you jumping over gaps to reach certain areas. Really, it doesn't quite feel like any other game of its genre on the system. You alternate between small-scale battles with your party using impressively animated 2D sprites, and fully 3D battles fought in giant mechs. You can even fight the small enemies with your mechs. This game has a huge sense of scale. You'll often find yourself controlling your pea-sized party in a gigantic environment. Even when outside of the world map, many of the larger cities in the game have their own submaps that really make the world seem massive. You also get these really cool-looking scenes seen from this large-scale perspective. Unlike the previous year's RPG mega hit, Final Fantasy VII, which used a lot of pre-rendered imagery, everything here that isn't an anime cutscene is presented in real-time 3D, and a lot of it actually still looks pretty good, being presented in an appealing, colorful style. In fact, the world may not look quite as detailed as in the pre-rendered backgrounds you found in similar games at the time, but it absolutely feels more detailed. There's always so much going on at once. As with Klonoa, this feels like a living, breathing world. And back to the combat, it's just as detailed. Every character has a large selection of special moves that can be learnt, each with their own neat animation. This applies to the small-scale and large-scale battles. There are times when this feels like it is the best PlayStation game of '98. Its scope is so much more than anything else you are seeing at the time. But that leads to some of the reasons why it isn't the best game of '98. The story can be hard to follow at times. Along with the previously mentioned religious and philosophical themes, the game also has complex political goings-on that you need to keep track of. And there's Faye's struggle with his identity, which makes FF7's similar plotline with Cloud look incredibly simple in comparison. There are also countless plotlines going on at once. There are a lot of characters, not only in your party, but also in the numerous side characters you meet along the way. You'll probably find yourself forgetting who's who and what they were doing when you last saw them. Who's this bearded dude again? Why does this guy want to kill me? Wait, this character's super important now? Though, that can be attributed to taking breaks from playing and not paying enough attention. The biggest issue with this game is its second disc, which, due to time limitations on the game's production, ended up getting turned into a summarization of what they wanted that half of the game to be. It's kind of like a slideshow, where you occasionally get put into a dungeon to fight through. It's pretty disappointing after the excellent presentation of the first disc, but it does eventually return to normal and give you back full control just before you get to the final dungeon. You can probably beat the game within 50 to 80 hours. Who knows how long this game would have been had the second disc been presented in the same way as the first. Despite its shortcomings, Xenogears is still one hell of a game. It has a great cast of characters, an incredible world, awesome visuals, some very cool combat. Oh, and I'd be crazy not to mention this game's soundtrack, which is one of the greatest and most memorable on the PS1. It may be outdone by more polished and refined RPGs that were released on the system, but nothing else comes close in terms of ambition. In fact, this is one of, if not the most ambitious games of the 90s, and that really makes it stand out in the PlayStation's library. Xenogears is absolutely a game that is worth playing, for both those who are fans of RPGs and those who want to see what may be the most grandly presented experience on a 32-bit game console.
Four.
The game that successfully combined the RPG and survival horror genres, Parasite Eve is the next game on the list. This Squaresoft release has you playing as Aya Bray, a New York City police officer facing a deadly mitochondria-based threat between Christmas Eve and New Year's. Gameplay-wise, it feels like a cross between Resident Evil and Squaresoft RPGs, such as Final Fantasy or Vagrant Story, which wouldn't see a release for another 2 years. You run through various New York settings, such as the Museum of Natural History or Central Park, while semi-randomly encountering enemies. These enemies being various animals whose cells have been altered to turn them into strange monsters. In these battles, you move around as a Final Fantasy-esque ATB meter fills. Once full, you can attack, use an item, or cast one of Aya's offensive or defensive mitochondria abilities. So, while it is turn-based in a way, you're also able to actively avoid most enemy attacks. This system actually holds up a bit better than the tank control combat seen in most horror games of the era. In and out of combat, you simply press the direction you want to go there. And while I don't think tank controls are nearly as bad as some people say, menu-based gameplay simply stands the test of time in a way that tank controls can't. Another area this game does a great job in is its presentation. You get very well-made CG cutscenes that, while dated in looks, have a stylish cinematic quality to them that still make them fun to watch. Aside from that, the game's 3D world map of New York is just awesome to look at, and is a great example of the PS1's visual aesthetics. And music-wise, this game has yet another great Squaresoft soundtrack, giving you haunting, club-inspired vibes throughout. The story is another area that holds up. In contrast to the often cheesy B-movie style presentation seen in most survival horror games of the time, Parasite Eve's plot seems much more well thought out. In fact, it happens to be a sequel to a Japanese novel of the same name, whose author was reportedly pleased with this game's take on his story. Taking its plot from a literary source may just be the reason for this comparatively smarter story. Another possible reason for this less cheesy feel is that the game has zero voice acting. Everything is presented in text. While that may seem like a chore to some, it does give it a classier vibe compared to the Z-grade acting it probably would have featured had it been voiced. It also leaves a lot more room for storytelling, giving you a much more fleshed out plot and world than nearly any horror game of the era. The cast of characters are great as well, with designs from Final Fantasy VII's character designer Tetsuya Nomura. Aside from the awesome lead, Aya, you get her partner, Daniel, Maida, a Japanese scientist, and the villain, Eve, among others. Everyone's got little quirks and unique personalities that are much more in line with the game's RPG side of things. And hey, that is definitely a good thing, giving its cast and world a feel that, again, was not common among Western-released horror games at the time. From start to finish, Parasite Eve is an engaging experience that you'll want to see through. In comparison to Xenogears' extremely dense 2 discs, the 2 that make up this game are much more tightly paced and easily finished, taking around 10 hours to complete. And for those who find that to be too short, when you do beat the game, you unlock the option to play through it again under an EX save file, which carries over your items from the previous save, and also gives you the option to enter the Chrysler Building, which has 77 partially randomized enemy-filled floors that gives you an alternate ending when you beat the boss on top. That's not bad as far as replay value and extra content goes. While for the most part it isn't exactly scary, Parasite Eve is still one of the best horror games on the PlayStation. Personally, I'd actually go as far as placing it at number 2 on my favorites of '98. Now, in making this an objective list, I can't quite place it that high, as the next few games are somewhat better. But it is a great game regardless. With its unique, well-written presentation and solid RPG gameplay, this is definitely a game that fans of the PS1 shouldn't miss.
Three.
Yes, another horror game. Resident Evil 2 takes the number 3 spot. The first Resident Evil, which ranked number 5 in the PlayStation Top 7 episode for 1996, was an excellent game and a huge hit. So you better believe that this sequel was highly anticipated at the time. Well, it was certainly worth the 2-year wait, because Resident Evil 2 improves upon the original in nearly every possible way.
Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down!
For starters, this game feels a whole lot bigger. While the first took place within the confines of the Spencer Mansion, 2 immediately throws you into the midst of a city-wide zombie pandemic, and then throws you into the confines of a large police station. But then you go far beyond it on an epic journey to get out of Raccoon City. As with the first, there are 2 playable characters to choose from, but they do much more of this concept. Leon and Claire's journey can differ drastically depending on if you play as them first or second, with different items, routes, puzzles, and the presence of the terrifying Mr. X during the second run. You'll need to play through the game 4 times if you want to see all the possible outcomes. The upgrades don't end there. Because there's no on-screen HUD, in the first game you had to check your inventory to see your character's health. In 2, your character is visibly wounded. The more you're injured, the more serious your limp is. Genius. This game's level design is also a big improvement. In RE1, it was somewhat easy to get lost. That is not as big of an issue here. You'll likely find yourself easily getting around the game's various settings. Really, the only area where this game isn't an improvement over the original is its lack of multiple endings, which was a pretty cool feature in the first. But that's not much in the grand scheme of things, and RE2 is certainly the one that has done the better job of holding up. Now, improvements aside, this is simply a great game. Its suspenseful moments can be just as tense as the day it came out, and its jump scares absolutely still work. I knew that was coming, and it still got me. The atmosphere is still amazing as well. From the museum-turned-police station to the laboratory at the end, these are some of the best horror environments you'll see on the PS1. And making your way through these environments is extremely satisfying. Finding new keys, unlocking new areas, and obtaining new weapons and upgrades, it all still feels great. This game has an excellent sense of progression. And, as with the first game, this never gets old. Now, this game does have an absolutely amazing remake that is very much worth playing, but the overall experience is actually fairly different, despite following the same basic story. And, in fact, the original version actually did a better job in making its storylines feel like 2 different experiences that happened concurrently. In addition, the remake's attempt to mix things up from the original by including Mr. X in both A and B scenarios actually makes things feel less varied. The '98 version really deserves some credit in that regard. While, sure, the story and voice acting are cheesy, and it does have the tank controls that some people just can't get over, this game actually has aged surprisingly well. It is hands down the best RE game on the PS1, and arguably the best horror game on the system. You really shouldn't miss out on Resident Evil 2.
You lose, big guy.
Two.
Coming in at number 2 is the game that all strategy RPGs strive to be, Final Fantasy Tactics. The first of many Final Fantasy games to take place in the land of Ivalice, Tactics has you leading your troops through 4 lengthy chapters of political intrigue and betrayal. While games like Shining Force or Vandal Hearts featured casts of characters with pre-designated job classes, FF Tactics gives you full control over your recruitable troops' roles. Be a wizard, a ninja, a summoner. It's up to you to choose the best lineup to tackle each of the game's battles. And hey, if you're not a fan of the whole personality void generic fighters thing, there are plenty of interesting and unique characters you meet throughout the game that can be recruited as well. If you go out of your way, this even includes the main character of Final Fantasy VII himself, Cloud. And if you're there wishing the game's various monsters could fight with you, they can. You can recruit any monster, and basically any troop you come across that isn't a named character. Now, back to the topic of character classes, this game is incredibly deep. As you level up, you unlock more classes and skills. You can not only equip skills from your selected class, but also a secondary set of skills from a class of your choosing. There are so many ways to mix and match these skills that you may end up spending more time in the formation menu than in actual battles, fine-tuning your party. The possibilities are endless. That said, the battles themselves are extremely engaging. Unless you're far overleveled, mindlessly running up to your enemies and attacking them isn't going to get you far in the game's more serious battles. The tactics in the name is no joke. You're frequently given not exactly easy challenges, such as facing enemies who have the high ground. You'll need to carefully think about the placement of your allies and what to do with them on each turn. And when you do everything right, there's nothing quite as satisfying as coming out on top during the game's decisive story battles. And while we're on the topic of the story, that is another one of this game's strong points. While its scale isn't quite as huge as the PlayStation's numbered entries in the Final Fantasy series, it's just as moving as any of those. Ramza's tale of standing up to corruption, which the game presents as a lost historical document being recovered, may leave you feeling fairly emotional by the time it's all said and done. Even if the PS1 translation is a bit spotty at times. Though, I do actually prefer it to the cheesy, old-timey English you hear in the War of the Lions version. On top of all that, this game has an amazing soundtrack as well. The tracks have this sweeping, somewhat melancholic sound that perfectly fit the game's mood. Of course, incredible music is to be expected in a PS1 Squaresoft release. And yes, their games do in fact take up more than half of the entries on this list. I think it's safe to say that they were the king of the PlayStation, especially in '98. With its all-around excellent presentation, Final Fantasy Tactics is one adventure that is very much worth your time. It's one of the best RPGs on the PS1, and is without a doubt its best strategy RPG. Hey, it may very well be the best strategy RPG of all time. It's certainly the most influential. If you are a fan of that genre, or simply want to give it a try, Final Fantasy Tactics is an absolute must-play.
One.
Kept you waiting, huh? The #1 PlayStation game of 1998 is Metal Gear Solid. In a time when the most cinematic games you could get were FMV-only adventure games like D, or text-filled RPGs like Final Fantasy VII, Hideo Kojima came along and put out something never seen before. A game with real-time action that played great, and real-time, storyboarded, and thoughtfully animated cutscenes that, aside from the low polygon count, were on a similar level to what you'd see in Hollywood movies. If you aren't already aware of one of the most famous titles released for the PS1, Metal Gear Solid is a game that has you playing as Solid Snake, a highly skilled super soldier sent on a stealth mission to infiltrate an Alaskan research facility that has been taken over by an equally elite special forces unit known as Foxhound. Sneak your way through the facility while gradually collecting new weapons and equipment and taking on Foxhound's key members. Though, I'm sure you already knew that. Now, this wasn't the first game based around stealth. It wasn't the first game in its series, or even the first PS1 game from 1998 in the stealth genre. But it is certainly the game that made the genre as popular as it would become in the following decade. MGS required a much more thoughtful approach than the standard run-and-gun shooter of the time. In fact, running and gunning likely won't get you very far. You need to keep track of enemy placement on your radar, make note of movement patterns, and slip past them when the opportunity strikes. Successfully doing so can be just as satisfying as blasting away a bunch of enemies in any action game. The sneaking gameplay is basically stealth at its most basic, and this actually makes it hold up incredibly well. While the genre can be overwhelming, in this case it's very easy to pick up and understand, and still very fun, in a tense sort of way. That said, the most famous thing about Metal Gear Solid's gameplay probably isn't its stealth, it's the bosses. The fights with Foxhound's members are hands down the best boss fights on the PlayStation, as well as some of the best and most unforgettable boss fights ever on any platform. There's the hand-to-hand fight with the Cyborg Ninja, there's the incredibly intense maze fight with Vulcan Raven, there's the now extremely popular and well-known fight with Psycho Mantis, which did so many inventive things with the PS1's hardware and in its actual presentation that there was simply nothing quite like it at the time, and really, not much since.
I can see into your mind. So, you like Suikoden?
Yep, the best PlayStation game of '98 references the best PlayStation game of '96. The fights add so much to the experience. Successfully sneaking past enemies feels great, but it's defeating these bosses that really makes you feel like the ultimate video game hero. And, of course, the way the game's story is presented is absolutely head and shoulders above anything else from the time. The cutscenes aren't just two characters standing there as they talk. There's movement, there's cinematography, and it sounds great. There is legit, well-acted, and well-directed voice acting, which wasn't something games were expected to have at the time.
Snake, I'm counting on you.
It's also dynamic. Depending on choices you make or items you obtain, certain scenes can go in slightly different directions, or, in the case of the ending, things can go very differently, depending on what you do during one pivotal moment. The game's story is very entertaining. There's twists and turns. There's awesome set pieces. The characters themselves are incredibly well thought out and memorable. This isn't some generic shooter where you couldn't care less about the plot. You will almost certainly become invested in what's going on and want to see what happens next.
What am I fighting for? What are you fighting for?
If we make it through this, I'll tell you.
Unless you're someone who can't appreciate graphics within the context of when a game was released, this really is one that absolutely holds up in every way. Everyone should play this game. And luckily, with the release of the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection, doing so has become the easiest it's been in quite some time. If only the same could be said for the other games on this list. Metal Gear Solid is one of the most iconic video games ever made, one of the most influential games ever made, one of the best games ever made, and it is without a doubt the best PlayStation game of 1998. Well, that's that. The top 7 PlayStation games of 1998. A year that may just have been the best ever for the system. Or was it? Be sure to tune in next time when we close out the millennium by looking at the top 7 PS1 games of 1999. Thanks for watching.